Hello and welcome to round 13 of Pro Tour Fate Reforged. I'm Tim Willoughby, here with R&D member Ian Duke, and we are ready to go down to the feature match area for 4 very nice feature matches. Let's go right down now and let the players get started. Hello and welcome to round 13 of Pro Tour Fate Reforged. I'm Tim Willoughby, here with R&D member Ian Duke, and we're going to start with a nice feature match here with a couple of decks we haven't seen too much in the feature match area thus far in Modern. On the left of our screen, we have Yuuki Ichikawa, the phenom from Japan. This is his 8th Pro Tour, but he might make his 3rd top 8 if he can string together a run here. He's playing Jund, a deck that he's known for playing in various formats already, and he's up against Alexandre Bonneau of France, and Alexandre is playing Living End. Now, Living End against Jund, already a really great matchup for the Living End player, and Yuuki Ichikawa here, he's on a mull to 5.
Yeah, so for those of you who are a little bit unfamiliar with Living End, it's a graveyard-based combo deck with a lot of cycling creatures that you just try to cycle through early in the game to get into your graveyard, and then you'll cast a Cascade spell, which will result in casting Living End, which simultaneously destroys all the creatures in play and brings back all the creatures from the graveyard. So all those creatures that you've cycled throughout the course of the game now come back onto the battlefield.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to see a kind of a slightly weird set of turns for the first few turns where Bonneau, we see there the 24-year-old from France. This will almost certainly be his best finish thus far at the Pro Tour. He's not played in too many before. We're going to see him cycling a lot, getting a lot of cards into the graveyard in the hope of having a really big Living End. Meanwhile, Ichikawa, who is on the Malta 5, he's got to try and find a way of either beating up Bonneau very, very fast, which might be tough considering that Living End's going to kill his creatures, or finding some form of disruption. Now, what disruptions he got?
Yeah, so the tough thing for the Jund deck here is that a lot of the cards that it normally uses to interact with creature decks aren't very effective against Living End. Cards like Abrupt Decay, Lightning Bolt really don't have too many relevant targets. What Ichikawa is really looking for is one of his copies of Scavenging Ooze that'll allow him to attack Bonneau's graveyard.
We see there that Ichikawa starts things off with a Dark Confidant. That 2-1 is going to get to draw him some more cards. Every upkeep, he's going to reveal the top card, put it in his hand and lose some life equal to the mana cost. And given that he's digging to a very small subset of cards, that's a pretty nice pickup for Ichikawa. But at the moment, things kind of going for plan for Bonneau. He's got his first cycle already. That's a 4-4 in the graveyard ready for later. The other cool thing about the Living End deck is that a lot of its cards are land cycling. So it can run a relatively small number of lands, but still make sure it hits each and every land drop of the game.
Mm-hmm. So we won't see a lot of action out of Bonneau early in the game, just a lot of cycling, making his land drops. But don't let that fool you. That's exactly according to his game plan. He just wants to spend these early turns cycling through his deck, building up his graveyard, until he's ready to cast a Cascade spell, which will allow him to flip through his deck and find his Living End.
Yeah, I mean, Bonneau not too worried about taking damage here. He's already taken 2 from fetch lands and 2 from cycling a Street Wraith. That Street Wraith, though, at some point it's just going to come into play, and it's got Swamp Walk. And you know what Ichikawa's got? There's a Swamp in play.
Yeah, it's relevant.
To attack him with an unblockable 3-4 at some point in the game, almost certainly.
Yeah, the Living End deck, it can kind of play out in a silly way often. You'll cast a Living Death and bring back 3 or 4 somewhat awkward creatures like Street Wraith or Simian Spirit Guide, things of this nature, and then spend the next couple turns just attacking with dorks. But you've gotten so much value out of the Living End that that's usually enough to close out the game.
Yeah, the B plan for this deck is actually casting creatures.
Mm-hmm.
But here we see the other side of the Living End deck that can be pretty savage. It has a land destruction angle.
Yeah, so we see Beast Within coming down here, being used very aggressively to attack Yuuki Ichikawa's mana. Particularly relevant because Ichikawa is on a mulligan to 5, I believe.
He is, yes. So this is getting rid of a Copperline Gorge here. It does mean that Ichikawa is going to get a 3-3 Beast token, but assuming that Alexandre Bonneau is able to find a Cascade spell, Cascade into Living End, that 3-3 really not too big of a worry. And in the meantime, Ichikawa is going to be stranded with not very many cards in hand. A Desperation Thoughtseize here takes a Shriekmaw, but reveals that actually Bonneau has nothing going on. He's just got a whole ton of lands.
Yeah, not exactly according to plan for Bonneau, but we'll see if Ichikawa can sort of mount an aggressive stance before Bonneau is able to draw out of this. Bonneau does have 8 copies of the Cascade cards in his deck, which are essentially Living Ends. And between that and the many cycling creatures, he should be able to turbo through his deck pretty quickly to find what he needs.
Yeah, I mean, only 19 lands in Bonneau's deck because he's got so many ways of finding them. So the fact that he's got so many right now means that, number one, he's a little bit unlucky, but number two, he's got a lot of live draws.
Yeah, and speaking of interesting draws here, Bonneau actually drew Living End itself proper, which strangely is not what the deck wants to do. Living End has Suspend, which means that he'll actually have to wait several turns before it goes off. He'd much rather have access to a Cascade spell, which will allow him to Living End instantaneously at will. But he does go ahead and suspend that, so in 3 turns from now, it will go off, destroying all creatures in play and bringing back Bonneau's graveyard.
But he may not have 3 turns. That attack from Yuuki Ichikawa, dropping Alexandre Bonneau down to 7 life. Tarmogoyf comes along to join the team for Ichikawa, who's at a relatively healthy 14. Now, any turn that Bonneau draws a Cascade spell, we're going to see this board change a great deal. But right now, he's on a very short clock.
Yeah, so interestingly, Bonneau used his first Beast Within very aggressively on Ichikawa's land, presumably because he was hoping to follow it up with a Shriekmaw. However, that Shriekmaw earlier got Thought Seized by Yuuki Ichikawa. Bonneau does find a second Shriekmaw, uses it to sort of stem the tide a little bit and take out the Tarmogoyf, but he's still on the back foot here. And we mentioned this being an unfavorable matchup for Jund, but this is one of the main ways that Jund can actually pull out the first game, is by just getting a really aggressive start and putting tons of pressure on the Living End deck's life total.
And Terminate there, clearing a path for Ichikawa, able to attack in for 5. Not often that you get a chance to see Dark Confidant doing quite this much damage to an opponent.
Yeah, it's done a lot of work this game.
And Bonneau on just 2 life. He needs to draw a Cascade spell this turn or it's all over. It's another shot, and that looked like a Violent Outburst.
Yeah, I think it was actually. That's just what he needs here. That's a pretty exciting draw. It is the Violent Outburst, I think.
Now, Violent Outburst, it's got a couple of things that it does. It gives creatures you control +1/+0 until the end of turn. That's lovely, that's fine. What it really does, though, is says Cascade. So when you play it, you keep going through your deck until you find a spell that costs less than it, and you get to play that for free. And this is an instant, so regardless of what the spell is, if it costs less than 3, you get to cast it at exactly the right moment.
And the catch here, of course, is Bonneau plays no cards in his deck, no non-land cards that cost less than 3, except for the Living End itself, which has a converted mana cost of 0, since it can only be suspended and not cast. So we see him flipping through his deck here with Cascade. He will eventually reach a Living End, and that'll swap creatures on the battlefield with creatures in graveyard. Now, Ichikawa does have a Tarmogoyf in his graveyard, but Bonneau has Shriekmaws in his graveyard as well. They're going to come back and clear out Yuuki Ichikawa's board.
So we're at a point now where Ichikawa can draw one of his lightning bolts and just end things. I don't believe that Alexandre Bonneau here has sufficient haste creatures. There are sometimes a few haste creatures in the Living End deck to be able to just end the game before Ichikawa gets a turn.
Yeah, bottom in random order.
So Bonneau more than enough power to finish the game next turn. We'll see if Ichikawa has or can draw one of his 4 lightning bolts.
So here we go.
And it looks like he already had it. Okay.
So Ichikawa takes game 1. Off a mull to 5, he has to be ecstatic about how that game went.
I mean, he's got to feel like he almost got away with something there. It's a rough matchup for him. He started on a mulligan to 5, but that Dark Confidant, I believe, was the hero.
And so we're going to get a chance to look at a little bit more of some of the other games shortly. But before that, we're going to see just a couple of messages.
Burn your fate into history. Fate Reforged is now available in Magic Online. Dive into the new set by downloading Magic Online at www.mtgo.com. Hunt bigger game by playing in a Grand Prix. These open tournaments feature the best players in your region as well as top Magic pros from around the world. Upcoming Grand Prix include Seville, Memphis, Vancouver, Miami, Liverpool, Cleveland, and Auckland. Visit magic.wizards.com/Grand Prix for the complete schedule.
Hello and welcome back to round 13 of Pro Tour Fate Reforged here. While our main match is just shuffling up for game 2, we've got a few updates from the other tables. In the Dutch Hall of Famer match, Frank Karsten currently a game up with his affinity deck over Robbie Yushma's blue-red twin deck, but we're going to get a chance to look in on Sam Black playing the Amulet deck that we saw a little bit of last round, but this round he's up against something quite different. Marco Lombardi with Merfolk on the left of our screen there. He's got a couple of curse catchers. He's got One Lord in play there to make his creatures a little bit bigger, and a Spellskite. No islands in play for Sam Black, so Island Walk's not a thing, but that's quite an impressive force there for Lombardi.
Looks like Sam is in the middle of one of his characteristic lengthy turns with this Amulet deck.
Yeah, the Amulet meaning that things that come into play tapped get a chance to untap when they come into play. When you've got Primeval Titan, you've got some lands that can come into play that tap for 2, they get untapped. And it may well be that we get to see a Slayer's Stronghold here that can set up an attack from Primeval Titan the turn it comes into play, and then all manner of craziness happens. Sam Black on 18 here. It looks like he's had kind of the run of the game thus far.
Yeah, I mean, what he really wants to do is get that Primeval Titan in play and have the breathing room to attack with it once or twice and get some more lands going. And it looks like he does have that breathing room here.
Yeah, this appears to be the second attack with the Primeval Titan, almost certainly coming down far, far earlier than one would normally expect. We can see a couple of Summer Balloons in the graveyard. If even one of them resolved, then that would kind of explain quite how Sam Black has been able to get as much good stuff going as he has.
Lombardi does have 6 power on the board with that Master of the Pearl Trident boosting the Curse Catchers to 2/2. So he can threaten to trade with the Primeval Titan, but that's not what he wants to be doing here for certain. Trading away his entire board worth of Merfolk. Probably not going to result in a win for him, but he may have to do something desperate like that pretty soon.
Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But in the meantime, Sam Black here saying, I've got plenty more lands in play, loads of mana untapped. I am attacking with my 6/6. What you going to do? Lombardi here, stuck. No mana to work with, but a few creatures to block with. I mean, how good is Spellskite in this matchup? Is it a reasonable just sort of speed bump here?
I mean, it can absorb up some damage, but that's really not what Lombardi wants to be doing. It doesn't really... I mean, the primary use of Spellskite is to magnet things like removal spells or auras, things of that nature, but Sam Black's deck doesn't really have any cards like that, so we're really just looking at a steel wall here for the most part.
Okay, you go to 5.
So it looks like Lombardi's saying, I'm gonna take the damage, and here comes a second copy of Primeval Titan. Now, obviously, after combat, it's not going to be doing quite as much deadly stuff, but it is going to make sure that Sam Black just has a terrifying amount of lands in play. And when you've got an awful lot of mana, you can play some very, very powerful spells indeed. Thank goodness that the expensive ones are better than the cheap ones, or else we've been in all sorts of trouble, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lombardi, it's tough for him to interact with Primeval Titans outside of combat. Of course, doesn't really want to trade multiple Merfolk for one of Sam's creatures, but we do see he has that Wanderwine hub there, which gives him access to Path to Exile. I don't know whether or not he has it in his hand right now, but that's a possibility that he may have an answer to at least one of the Primeval Titans that way.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one. I mean, something that I guess he could do is Phantasmal Image to make his own copy of Primeval Titan.
Yeah, that can certainly buy him some time, threaten to trade, get some more lands in play for him. Silvergrail Adept digging a little bit here, probably looking for something like a Path to Exile or a Phantasmal Image.
I mean, ultimately, he just wants to get lots of toughness on the board right now, right? Because both of those Primeval Titan do have Trample.
Yep. The other thing he can do, if he had enough time, theoretically, is stack up enough Lords in play that his Merfolk can start trading at a better rate for the Primeval Titans. But with Marco already down to 5 life and those trampling Primeval Titans threatening to attack, backed up by a Slayer's Stronghold, I believe.
Yeah, Slayer's Stronghold and Sunhome Fortress of Legion both doing great work in the Amulet deck, able to basically turn any creature into a very credible threat. And realistically, Primeval Titan doesn't need a whole lot of help in that regard anyway. But it seems like Sam is going for the combo kill as well. He's got a Hive Mind, and this is
Combat.
a much more difficult to interact with kill in some respects than simply attacking.
Triggers.
The fact that the Amulet deck can do both makes it really very, very scary. A Pact from Sam Black now is almost certain to be a big problem for Marco Lombardi.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sam in the middle of his combat step here, fetching up some lands. We're likely to see a lot of blocking from Marco here, just trying to set up some trades and absorb the damage from the Primeval Titans. In the meantime, for those of you who haven't seen the Hive Mind combo much at home, the way it works is Hive Mind gives your opponent a copy of each spell you cast. So if you cast a spell like a Pact, which requires mana payment on upkeep, otherwise you lose the game, you can actually cast that on your turn, pass the turn to the opponent, have them be unable to pay for it, and then they lose the game.
And just so you can see what Sam Black's doing here, he gets to put 4 lands in play. He searched up Bounce Land and a Teleria West, amongst other things, such that he's going to be able to go and find a Pact. Also, he kind of effectively untapped a bunch of lands because he played lands that untap and bounced lands that were already tapped.
So he uses the Primeval Titan to put Teleria West onto the battlefield, uses a bounce land to then pick the Teleria West up, and now post-combat he threatens to be able to to transmute that Teleria West into a Pact, which has a converted mana cost of 0, which he can then use to give his opponent a copy of with the Hive Mind, pass the turn to his opponent, and have his opponent lose the game on the upkeep, being unable to pay for the Pact. So quite a convoluted process here.
Yeah, it's very much a puzzle. Do not be worried at all if you're having trouble keeping up with this one, because to be fair, I think a large number of the players in the room aren't necessarily going to be able to play this deck.
Yeah, and we talked about that last round, how it's potentially a huge advantage to Sam Black to have sort of a rogue deck like this, where he knows what his plan is, his opponent doesn't necessarily know what he's up to until it's too late.
So Sam does take that game. A little bit complicated in the middle there, but didn't ever feel like it was incredibly close. We are going to get a chance to jump back to our main match because we haven't missed a single moment of that main match. In the meantime, they are just shuffling up for game 2. And let's talk a little bit about the sideboarding that's going on between Ichikawa and Bonneau, because there are a number of really interesting lines of interaction for the Jun deck here.
Yeah, so we talked about Ichikawa's deck having a tough time interacting in game 1. Out of the sideboard, he has some more options here. Jun Charm is one notable one. One of the modes on Jun Charm is to exile players' graveyards. So he can use that to sort of set his opponent back to square one, removing all the creatures in the graveyard. Another important one here in Fulminator Mage can kind of delay things a little bit, just destroying some lands, buying some time. And there's one that you noted, Tim, Slaughter Game. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, now Slaughter Game is a real problem for a deck that has so singular a plan as Living End, because what it does is it says, name a card, search your opponent's deck, remove all copies of that card. Now, for many decks, you know, if you're playing a regular beatdown deck and someone gets to remove your Tarmogoyfs, that's kind of fine, because you can just say, well, I'm going to be able to attack on another axis. If Alexandre Bonneau loses his Living Ends, he's going to be stuck casting a bunch of largely overcosted creatures. Doesn't mean to say that the Frenchman can't win that way, but it makes his life a lot more difficult, as effectively he's then playing a deck full of expensive creatures that aren't necessarily as impactful as the more efficient threats you normally see in Modern. So a Thoughtseize there from Ichikawa, getting rid of a Shriekmaw. Shriekmaw, one of the cards that can't be cycled. You do really want to be evoking it to kill a creature most of the time. So that is a little bit of a pain for Alexandre Bonneau. And Ichikawa now just sort of saying, I have a way to interact. I'm already a game up, which is quite frankly a very happy place for him to be. Quite surprising that he won that first game.
Yeah, I think
now he just needs to put it away.
As the Jun player, you probably expect to give up the first game just for lack of interaction, and then hope to steal some games post-sideboard with some of the cards that we talked about. Ichikawa starting up a game, you know, he's in a comfortable position here. He may even feel like, well, you know, if things don't go my way this game, at least I have the third. Starts off with a Thoughtseize, taking with his Shriekmaw. It looks like Bonneau head to mulligan. I believe I counted a 5-card hand there, but certainly did not start with 7.
Yeah, tough spot for Alexandre Bonneau. I mean, this is a deck that, in principle, it shouldn't really need to mulligan all that much because it should have lots of cyclers. But if you get the wrong mix of lands and spells, it can be a little bit messy. And we look at Ichikawa's hand there. He's got Scavenging Ooze, which is fantastic in the matchup. He's got Fulminator Mage, which can punish the low land count of Bonneau's deck. Tasigur is going to be a very quick threat. And then Inquisition of Kozilek to potentially snag a sideboard card out of Alexandre Bonneau's hand. And one option that I've heard of being employed by some Living End decks, not necessarily by Bonneau, is having a number of very, very impactful sideboard cards that you can cascade into, just so that you can say, if there's a matchup, I mean, say Affinity, where you just desperately want to get into play your Stony Silence, you can stick one in there and just cascade into it.
Yep, great point.
Not necessarily something that's going on here, but it is something that potentially some of the Living End decks are looking to do.
So we see Ichikawa used Fulminator Mage to set Bonneau back a turn on lands, just sort of noting that, well, my opponent started down some cards. It's likely he doesn't have too many lands in his hand. I may be able to just sort of mana screw him with this Fulminator Mage and steal the game that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that there is the potential to do that. I mean, the key color for trying to keep the living deck off is red, because both the Cascade spells that are run by the living end deck have red in their cost. They're either red-black and red-green. One way or another, if they don't have red, they can't do anything. As it is, I think it's going to be tough to fully put the screws on Alexandre Bonneau in terms of hitting the mana that he needs. But one thing that Ichikawa's deck can do that Bonneau's can't is present a clock in the meantime. It can disrupt while being aggressive.
That's right. But speaking of putting the screws on, we see Ichikawa just picked up a copy of Scavenging Ooze, one of his most potent cards in the matchup. So we may see him just deploying that rather aggressively here and chomping up some of the graveyard.
Yeah, I mean, basically what the Scavenging Ooze says is because it can gradually eat creatures in the graveyard, it means that Bonneau doesn't have the luxury of gradually filling his graveyard. He's going to have to go for one big turn, otherwise there just might not be anything left to bring back with Living End. Shriekmaw already going there, and Yuuki Ichikawa, he gets a big threat, he gains some life. Scavenging Ooze basically does everything he could possibly want in the matchup.
That's right. So let's take a look at Alexandre Bonneau's hand.
Shriekmaw, a fine pickup here, able to get rid of that Scavenging Ooze before it does too much damage. But the problem is that it will come back at some point and have more things to eat, potentially.
Potentially, yeah, post-Living End. So likely to use that Shriekmaw to take out the Ooze. That's to be expected here. And of note, Bonneau did pick up a copy of Violent Outburst, so that gives him access to Living End when he thinks he's ready for it, when he thinks he needs it. So he wants to start building up his graveyard again. He's sort of back to square one, just has the Shriekmaw there. So it's likely that he'll spend a few more turns developing his graveyard before he's ready to pull the trigger on Living End.
We see a Simian Spirit Guide in Bonneau's hand. That kind of an interesting one from the deck because it's a 3-mana spell, a 3-mana 2/2, but what it really does in the matchup is it says I can potentially cast either a Fulminator Mage or one of my Cascade spells on turn 2 if I need to. And just catch people out, play your big spells when people aren't expecting it. So a powerful addition, but not likely one that's going to have so much impact in this game, I don't think.
Inquisition of Kozilek here from Yuuki Ichikawa reveals Bonneau's hand. Now he sees the Violent Outburst there, and that's really key for him to get that information now. Believes he just strips it away there, says, "Nuh-uh, I don't want to leave you with access to Living End."
And counting cards in graveyard, that means there's a Delve spell coming. It used to be that was the Treasure Cruise moment, but now we have Tasigur doing his best impression of the powerful Delve spell. A 4/5, and leaves the Scavenging Ooze behind because he wants to make sure that in the case of Living End, he's got some kind of a follow-up.
And an attack from Treetop Village. So Tasigur's card draw ability not at its best in this matchup, but I think Ichikawa is really just playing it as a clock, as a big threat here. And he's threatening 7 points of attack each turn between Tasigur and the Treetop Village. So threatening to close out the game relatively quickly.
I mean, the relatively funny thing about Tasigur is that if it ever worked out that Ichikawa had lots and lots of mana available, just the fact that he can get more cards into his graveyard is not the worst in this matchup.
That's true.
Yes, Bonneau would give him back a card each turn, but actually, either way around, it's going to be a useful zone for him. Either his hand or his graveyard is kind of live.
So Bonneau with a copy of Ingot Chewer Strand in his hand. That's a post-sideboard addition, probably to combat something like Grafdigger's Cage.
Or Relic of Progenesis.
Or
maybe.
Relic, yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, not particularly useful the way that this game has played out.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things when you have a relatively sort of narrow combo is trying to predict the way that people are going to interact with it, because there's not necessarily so many ways of interacting naturally with this combo.
Note that he can, if he wants, just evoke it for 1 red mana, just to get a 3/3 creature in his graveyard if he is ready to pull the trigger on a Living End. Ichikawa with an Inquisition, a Lightning Bolt, and a Raging Ravine in his hand. Lightning Bolt giving him a little bit more power to close out the game, as does the Raging Ravine that he just added to the battlefield. So the clock is ticking on Bonneau here, and to that end, he adds a Simian Spirit Guide just as a 2/2 creature to the battlefield.
And Ichikawa says, I'm going to activate Tasigur. Can I have a Lightning Bolt or a Scavenging Ooze? And pretty happy with either. He gets the Bolt.
Yeah, that's a rock and a hard place for Bonneau. I mean, the Lightning Bolt, at the very least, can take out the Simian Spirit Guide.
And he draws a Jund Charm.
Oh, goodness. Just all the answers this game.
Yeah.
Yuuki Ichikawa, one of the most popular Japanese streamers. This is, I mean, he has a job, but on top of it, he puts in job-like hours on Magic Online, streaming, playing all sorts of different formats. And that really, the amount of play that he has had is part of the reason he's just skyrocketed his success in the last couple of years on the Pro Tour.
We can see how powerful Jun Charm is in this matchup. At instant speed, remove target player's graveyard from the game. As long as Ichikawa holds up that black, red, and green mana, Bonneau is going to be hard-pressed to make any headway as far as his living end game plan.
And once you get past the living end game plan, there's not so many things that Bonneau is going to be doing. He's basically just going to be casting creatures and trying to get in a fight, but Tasiga's a big creature to try and fight.
That's right.
I mean, it used to be the case that actually the living end deck was comparatively good at just rumbling in the red zone because its creatures, while they're expensive, they are relatively hefty. But actually, Tasiga can fight with them comparatively well. And he gets back Scavenging Ooze there, as it's the only non-land hit with Tasiga.
Yeah, a bit of a lucky break there for Ichikawa. Although I don't think he really needs it at this point. He's just really got the game locked up with the Jun Charm, with the Lightning Bolts there, and with the pressure he has on board.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, Ichikawa managing his graveyard fairly carefully. There's just a Lightning Bolt in there as he fires it off to the head. Alexandre Bonneau going to 9 here, and following it up with, that's the Scavenging Ooze. So
we just received word that Jelger Vigersma has tied things up against Frank Karsten in their match 1-1, forcing a third game of Affinity versus Blue-Red Twin.
And that could be a really good one to see a little bit more of. Seth Manfield also now in game 3 up against Eric Froelich, so potentially losing his crown for the first time in a while and taking his first loss of the weekend, Seth Manfield, but that will be a game 3 that we may be able to get a little bit of a look in on, because realistically I'm not sure that this match is going to take too much longer.
Yeah, it's looking grim here for Bonneau. Adds a Fulminator Mage to the board, sort of in a desperate effort to chump block one more turn, maybe try to take out one of those man lands. But I believe with a Lightning Bolt here on the Fulminator Mage, clearing it away as a chump blocker, that leaves the path open for Scavenging Ooze and Tasiger to finish things up.
And there's the handshake. Alexandre Bonneau doing the math just to make sure that the attack will be lethal. He extends his hand, and Yuuki Ichikawa advances to 10-3. So we're going to get a chance to see our current undefeated player on the King of the Hill table, that being Seth Manfield. He's up against Eric Froelich, and this is game 3 between the burn deck of Manfield and the Abzan deck from Eric Froelich. Froelich with Tarmogoyf in play already, that seems to be a 3-4 by my count, potentially attacking as a 4-5 thanks to Exalted, but Eidolon of the Great Revel on the other side of things means that every spell that Eric casts, or indeed that Seth casts that costs 3 or less, is going to deal 3 damage to that player. 2 damage, sorry.
Manfield pondering his options here.
Yeah, creatures on the board that have a toughness of greater than 3 present a little bit of a quandary for the burn deck, because it doesn't really want to be pointing removal spells at creatures if it can be pointing them at the head, but at some point you kind of have to. Yeah,
the one exception to that rule is Searing Blaze, which allows you to do 3 damage both to a creature and its controller if you have landfall active. So we'll certainly see that be used to remove early mana creatures, but beyond that, I think Seth really prefers to save his burn to go directly to Eric if he can.
And there he blocks a Tarmogoyf, but that does mean that next turn Tarmogoyf's going to be a little larger, a little bit harder to deal with.
So that block there likely means that Seth is going to have an end-of-turn burn spell on the Tarmogoyf to combine with the 2 damage from the Eidolon. At 18 life, I don't think he otherwise would have blocked that early in the game. Oh, interesting.
That looks like a Boros Charm.
It does, and that certainly
head.
Cannot hit a creature. So he's going directly for Eric here, who appears to be at 14 life. This would knock him down to 10. And you got to be nervous when your opponent starts pointing burn at you when you're at 14. Because that likely means there's a lot more to come.
The scratch of the head of Eric Froelich, who's now wondering whether or not he's going to get another turn's attacking it. I think it's tough for the burn deck to deal 10 damage off 3 lands, though, right?
In a single turn, yes, that is very tough. I think what Seth has probably done here is mapped out the next 2 turns of the game, where he's thinking, okay, if I block with my Eidolon, that prevents a little bit of damage from the Tarmogoyf. It also prevents any subsequent damage I would take from casting my own spells. And he's hoping, I think, to get 2 more turns without dying. We see Rift Bolts here, so he definitely wants to live to his next turn. That's his plan here.
Yeah, suspends 2 Rift Bolts. There's a 3rd Rift Bolt in hand, which is likely going to be a little too late, but there's 2 copies of Skullcrack in his hand as well there by the looks of things. And this ought to be enough, assuming that he's able to survive the next turn or 2, which on 18 is a reasonable assumption.
Yeah, well, if indeed all he has are these 2 Rift Bolts and a Skullcrack on 2 lands, he's unable to play any more spells. So that would be 9 points on his next turn. Eric is at 11 here. With the Scavenging Ooze.
Ooh, Timely Reinforcement.
Oh, wow. One of the most back-breaking cards a burn deck can see. Just a huge card out of the sideboard here, gaining Eric 6 life. Doesn't add any creatures to the battlefield, but he's happy to just gain the 6 life here. It's effectively like a double counter spell, stopping 2 burn spells.
And we've just heard that there may be a Leyline of Sanctity coming up as well, which is a massive problem for the burn deck. When all it can do is point its burn spells at creatures, it cannot win the game.
Yeah, it's going to be really tough press to win.
So this is the deciding game between Burn and Abzan here. Eric Froelich looking to be the first person to do anything to unseat the current leader. And even if he wins this match, taking the King of the Hill table, Seth Manfield will still be on the most match points.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I mean, when you're in this position, you want to take every round as it comes and do your best to win every single round. Of course, the higher Seth places in the Swiss, that's going to give him advantage on the play versus the draw in the top 8. So,
oh goodness, the burn deck always going first.
Yeah, that's
terrifying.
That's a big advantage. So we see those Rift Bolts pointed at Eric's life total directly, knocking from 17 down to 11. Unfortunately, it's still 4 burn spells away for Seth. So he's going to suspend another Rift Bolt, hope to see the light of day another turn, but Froelich, if he can, is want to put together that Leyline of Sanctity. Although, I want to take another look at his mana base. I think I only saw 1 white source on the Noble Hierarch there. I could be wrong. Looks like only 1 white source. So he's unable to play the Leyline this turn, which is huge. But Liliana comes down, ticking up. That's going to steal a burn spell out of Seth's hand. Of course, Eric knows Seth doesn't have any lands left in his hand because he missed his 3rd land drop. So it does take away the valuable Skullcrack.
And a couple of attacks here from Froelich.
So it looks like Seth will see another turn. He does have a card in his hand that he preferred to keep over the Skullcrack. So it's possible that's a Boros Charm or something that's capable of doing more damage or doing damage more efficiently. Could be a 1-mana burn spell, a Lava Spike, for example. We'll take a look at that when we can for you guys at home.
I think it may actually be a 2nd Skullcrack.
Oh, a 2nd Skullcrack. Okay, well, that makes the decision of what to discard pretty easy then. So Eric Froelich at 11 life, Seth Manfield with a Rift Bolt suspended, looking to do 3 points during his upkeep, has another 3 points in hand. Can he find 5 more off the top? I think it's unlikely, and he extends the hand.
Eric Froelich, the first player to take a match off Seth Manfield. He's going to be in the feature match area next round. You'll get a chance to see some more of him with his Abzan deck on the King of the Hill table. But we're going to get a chance to see a little bit of a Game 3 from one of our other matches as we head down to see the Dutch Hall of Fame match. On the left of our screen, that's Jelge Wiegersma. He's playing Splinter Twin, and he's already got a Deceiver Exarch in play. So 1/2 of his combo. The combo for Frank Carsten's a little bit more convoluted. It involves getting lots of artifacts in play and beating people up really, really fast. But we see here not too many real power cards from the Affinity deck for Frank. And with Deceiver Exarch that comes into play, when it comes into play, you get to untap or tap target permanent. Untap a permanent you control, tap a permanent your opponent controls. With Splinter Twin, you get to say, I'm going to tap my Deceiver Exarch, make a copy of Deceiver Exarch, untap the one that can make more copies, make infinite Deceiver Exarchs, and attack for the works all in one go. Very, very dangerous spot here for Frank Carsten.
Yeah, but you know, Frank not having many ways to interact with the Splinter Twin just sort of has to say, if you've got it, you've got it. I've got to continue playing my game plan and try to defeat you as quickly as possible. In case you don't have it, I'm not going to give you the time to draw into it. So we see Frank deploying a Thoughtcast here, just re-upping on cards a little bit. He's got a couple of Blinkmoth Nexuses to add a little bit of pressure to the board, but what he's lacking right now are those heavy hitter cards that Affinity is known for. Cards like Cranial Plating, Master of Ethereum, Arcbound Ravager. And so he's going to want to find one of those as quickly as possible to really put a heavy clock on Yelger. Now, we do see one more relevant card in Frank's hand, and that is Spellskite.
Well, there's actually another one there too. There's a Galvanic Blast.
Oh, okay. Both of those really interesting cards here. So Galvanic Blast with Metalcraft, if he controls 3 artifacts, can do the 4 damage he needs to threaten to kill that Deceiver Exarch at instant speed. And although Frank only has Mox Opal and Darksteel Citadel as artifacts right now, he can activate one of those Blinkmoth Nexuses as long as he leaves up an extra colorless mana. Beyond that, Spellskite, another welcome addition to Frank's board here to help him feel a little bit safer. The reason Spellskite is so important against Splinter Twin is you can actually redirect the aura Splinter Twin. Since it does have a target while it's on the stack, you can redirect it to the Spellskite and sort of absorb that into the Spellskite, prevent it from landing on the Deceiver Exarch.
So plenty for Yelger Vigashima to work through, but in the meantime, he can plink in for a point here and there if he wishes, or just use the fact that that 1/4 is comparatively big to block with. He looks at his hand, there's an Anger of the Gods, there is a Splinter Twin here. Is he going to go for it? I mean, we know that with just the 1 land untapped, it's going to be tough for Frank to do too much this exact turn.
There's a reaction to Spellskite in the night phase. Resolved.
So a Spellskite in play for Frank. He's calmly just sort of looking on as Vigashima taps down Blinkmoth Nexus. A new Mox Opal. Now, the legend rule means that these days, Mox Opal, very powerful indeed. If you draw a second one and play it, you choose which one you want to keep in play, so you just keep the untapped one. The mythic rare from Scars of Mirrodin, seeing play in Vintage these days as well. I know Randy Bueller, a big fan of that one in his mono blue deck that runs just a single land that happens to be a Tolarian Academy and quite likes artifacts too. In the meantime, Yelger Vigashima trying to figure out a way of getting around this. It's a bit of a kind of posturing game here almost. Neither player really killing the other one.
We're seeing this game play out in a rather silly way for 2 ostensibly powerful decks. They're just chipping away at each other with these 1-power creatures kind of maneuvering, jockeying for the board. As long as Frank has that Spellskite in play, he's feeling relatively safe. Of course, you know, it's not complete immunity to Yelger's potential combo, but it does mean Yelger has to have at least 1 more card to assemble things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most likely end to the game from Yelger's perspective at the moment would be if he could do something along the lines of end of turn, Cryptic Command to bounce your Spellskite, untap into a Splinter Twin or something of that stripe. But we know that actually there's Galvanic Blast and also a Dismember now in Frank Karsten's hand. So even if his Spellskite does get dealt with, quite a few ways for Karsten, the doctor of maths and I think it's game theory actually.
Yep, PhD in game theory.
To interact with what Vigashima is trying to do.
So a particularly reactive hand from Frank Karsten here, sitting on a Galvanic Blast and a Dismember. Of course, both of these threatening to kill Deceiver Exarch at instant speed. It means, you know, essentially each one of these cards that Frank Karsten has, Spellskite, Galvanic Blast, Dismember, threatens to trade 1 for 1 with one of Yelger's answer cards or threat cards that he wants to use to push through his combo.
Now, one thing we don't know is exactly how Yelger sideboarded. It may be that if he felt that there were too many ways of interacting, that actually Yelger was simply going to become more of a beat-down control deck.
Yeah, and he seems to be doing that. He's wisely taking advantage of the fact that Frank Karsten seems to have a really reactive, threat-light hand, just deploying out those Deceiver Exarchs and now a Pestermite, and saying, you know what, if you're just going to sit there and not do anything and wait for me to combo, I'm going to peck away at you for 3-4 points a turn.
We see here Karsten not super happy about how this game's going. Ancient Grudge, a very powerful card for Vigashima, able to deal with, but it looks like the Spellskite there.
Yeah, so Karsten probably feeling a little bit more nervous here.
So Galvanic Blast down. There's just that Dismember left as disruption. And the good thing about the Dismember from Yelger Vigashima's side of things is that as it's a spell, he does have the opportunity to counter it if he can draw into the appropriate ways of interacting. In the meantime, he's got Anger of the Gods and Engineered Explosives, which are a great way of blunting any kind of attack that Karsten might
And he
have
just
had.
drew Splinter Twin here. He's going for it. Yelger, he sees weakness here. Frank Karsten used the Galvanic Blast on the Pestermite last turn. It could have been his own removal spell. Of course, we at home know he has one Dismember sitting in his hand. But now Karsten has to think, I mean, you know, does Yelger have a counterspell? He really can't afford to second guess himself here. He can't let that Splinter Twin resolve. It will be game if it does. But of course, Karsten, you know, being patient, talking through the lines, maybe getting some information out of Yelger.
Yelger not necessarily one to give away too much information, but I mean, both these players are, you know, are perfectly happy to talk Dutch if they wish to one another and have a sort of a friendly game where they're talking their original language, language of their homeland, and he may be able to get some kind of a read on his friend.
Interesting thing going right now. Frank Karsten just puts the Dismember up on the table. Let's not hide things. You know I have this. I know I have to cast it. I'll turn it face up. What he is deciding is how many lands is he going to tap. He has 2 Glimmer Voids, so he can potentially spend 2 mana on it and only pay 2 life to the Phyrexian mana, or he can pay the full 4 life. He needs to think about, you know, effects like Spell Pierce. Of course, not Spell Pierce exactly, because it does counter a spell unless you pay 2 mana, but he's thinking about just, do I want to leave a land untapped for any reason here?
It seems unlikely that there's going to be too many stubborn denials or similar.
Yeah, but you got to think, you know, when you're in a position like this where you have no other options, you might as well think about the one thing that could be relevant.
And just a quick update from one of our other tables. Sam Black has been victorious over Marco Lombardi's Merfolk deck. So this is the last match that we got going in the feature match area. Stay in your seats. We've got plenty more Magic after this, though. This only round 13. There's going to be a few more rounds of Magic. It's not all locked up yet. We've seen Eric Froelich win already. He's got to make a bit of a run to try and top 8. Seth Manfield has picked up his first loss. There's an awful lot still going on here. But in the meantime, we're going to see whether or not Yelger Vigersmer can find a way of putting this one away.
So Crisis averted there. Dismember did successfully disrupt Yelger's Splinter Twin combo, doing away with both one of the Deceiver Exarchs and the Splinter Twin. And things are back to this low resource game now where each player just attacking for a couple points of damage. Oddly, Ornithopter coming down as a wall that's successfully blocking the Deceiver Exarch. So now Frank in the driver's seat dealing 2 points of damage each turn. Yelger not able to get through for any points of damage. Again, a rather silly way for this game to play out, but sometimes even among these super powerful decks, they counteract each other for so long that the game gets down to a low resource state like this, and it's just kind of last man standing. Well, chipping in for damage.
That Serum Vision's found another Splinter Twin, so we've gone from 0 to hero
my goodness.
very, very quickly here. What does
just like
Frank
that,
Karsten have?
Ornithopter not going to do it.
Ornithopter and a handshake was the best he could do, which he's going to drop to, he's now on 9 and 4, whereas Yelger Vigersmer on 10, 2 and 1. The Dutch Hall of Famer, he came into the feature match area for the first time in round 3, said, you know what, I kind of like it in here. It's nice and warm, the chairs are comfortable, I kind of want to hang out here more. We said, well, you know, there's this King of the Hill table. He spent pretty much the whole of yesterday there. He's back in the feature match area. I think it's unlikely he's going to leave there too much until it comes to top 8, and hopefully he won't get to leave there until the end. But we're done now for round 13. So we're going to hand over to the news desk and see Rich and find out what's been going on in the rest of the room here at Pro Tour Fate Reforged.
Thanks so much to Tim Willoughby and Ian Duke there. Great stuff. The 2 Dutchies going hammer and tongs, trying to make it into the top 8. 3 rounds to come. Great action coming your way. Right now, though, we've got a deck tech over at the video wall waiting for us, Hall of Famer Randy Buehler, and to tell us all about black-white tokens, Pro Tour champion Stanislav Sivka.